of all the criticisms of the Book of Abraham, I think what most people miss most is one, that there's a spiritual testament, a spiritual knowledge and understanding which comes, a spiritual witness. But two, even from an academic perspective, you have to recognize that academia is not perfected, that it's ever-changing. And two, we have to understand it from their context and perspective, where it came from, not from today. And so too often today we have things that catch our attention. We see a image of Mesopotamian kings and a star or a sun and stars or planets, and people go, oh my gosh, the ancient Mesopotamians had detailed understanding of the solar system because Pluto and Neptune are right next to the Earth. And first off, we buy too easily into these types of things. Second, we have to look at the ancient scribal schools. Look at the context there. First, if we have Abraham, son of Terah, who more likely than not is the historical king or ruler of Urkesh, which was Teru. There's a Egyptologist who goes through the semantics of the wording and everything. I don't have that on hand right now, so I'm not going to reference that or try to explain it. But you have Abraham's father Teru, king of Urkesh, the last one, who in the Mari tablets is in communication with people of Mari. This is the time of King Hammurabi. This is the pharaoh at the time during this range would have been Neferhotep, whose god is Sobek, the crocodile god, which we see in the facsimile, I think it's facsimile 1, where Joseph Smith names as God of Pharaoh. This is one of the biggest criticisms people have tried to attempt against Joseph Smith and the Book of Abraham and the facsimiles, the papyrus. But the more and more we learn, the more and more we find that he was very on point. Not only that, we do have Abraham going into Egypt. What's he doing in Egypt? Apparently he is writing something, because we have the papyri showing that he is writing a record of his history. But if we remember, what is Abraham doing? He is a righteous man, desires more righteousness, sees that his father, he wants to go back to the root of all things. He wants more knowledge and insight. Now, where is more knowledge and insight going to be retained? It's going to be retained in writing. It's going to be retained in the spreading out of the sons of Noah and their posterities. He meets Melchizedek. He receives the priesthood through Melchizedek, pays tithes to Melchizedek. Now, from his position, if he was a son of a ruler of a city-state like Urkesh, then he's going to be schooled in the scribal arts. He's going to learn those things, especially during this time, which would have been about sometime in mid-1750 BC, give or take 50 years, based on where this is coming, whether everything is happening in pure childhood, where he's learning scribal arts as a child and broadening that as he gets older. But the fact that we see these scribal arts shown, what he's depicting are things that would be religious in nature. It's not just writing, it's hieroglyphic, things that would be found in tombs. That goes to the hierarchy of the scribal arts. They, during that time period, you had scribal schools that would come in and teach other rulers because they want to have some form of camaraderie and communication. So they're still meeting with other rulers. You're learning each other's written language. For the most part, cuneiform is still used, using an Egyptian written language on top of that, and expounding that knowledge through the higher state of learning of writing. Because think of it this way, it's in our scriptures it says that from the time of Adam there is kept a book of remembrance, which means that writing initiated with Adam and stayed with Adam's posterity. That writing was a way to remember what had already been learned and expedite our learning. Because before, what you're doing is, if you don't have writing, if you don't know mathematics, which to do in a broader sense needs writing, then you're basically not gonna grow. And our writing typically does start in mass with kings. Now the kings back then would also be king priests. There was a royal sense about them. There was a priestly sense about them. This is where all the knowledge is kept. Your priests and your rulers, those are going to be the most wise people. So what are they inherently going to be able to do, or should be able to do, is to read, write, do mathematics, things like that. Now you know Urkesh becomes called Ur of the Chaldees. And this happens, 1,200 years later, about 600 BC. You get, and that's a roundabout. I don't have the exact date when it was officially called Ur of the Chaldees, or of the Chaldeans. And these people were known for their ability and knowledge of astronomy, the stars, keeping track of things, sensing what signs are. So this is obviously something we see that was important with Abraham. However, you see the fall of Urkesh, where Teru himself is kicked out of rulership. His people didn't like him. You had different groups of people merging in. Hammurabi with broadening his empire and his conquering. This is the War of the Nine Kings. And then you see Teru kicked out and become an Epiru, a tent dweller, a wanderer, a fighter for hire, basically. And the cool thing here is when we look at the Hyksos, these are the Western Asiatics. Josephus, which was a Jewish scholar in the Common Era, he referred to the Hyksos as, quote, shepherd kings, unquote, close quote. And that's what we have in our definition in our scriptures, is known as shepherd kings. However, he referenced Manetho. He was a priest of On, this is at Heliopolis. This is where Joseph, where his wife came from. His wife's father was a priest of On. So that's in Heliopolis. All right. Manetho called the Hyksos foreign rulers. And it typically referred to Asiatics of all sorts, but it also gets referenced with, people who were not Asiatic, so not shepherds, but they're simply foreign rulers. So that was a very broad term earlier on. Again, Manetho was a priest of On at Heliopolis that worships Amun or Amun-Ra. That would have been that deity, the sun deity. The Greeks call it Heliopolis because that is their sun deity. And you notice this with the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Sumerians. What they end up doing is they recognize each other's gods and they integrate, oh, this is the equivalent of ours to yours. This is the equivalent of ours to yours. So now you have rulers of Mari and their letters with Urkesh. Not to mention, these people are already intermarried with each other. Their spouses from earlier generations have come from each other's cities and this unity. So you could easily see someone like Sarai being a ruler of a place like Mari or one of the other Sumerian city-state capitals, and being of value to that Egyptian pharaoh who wanted to take her as a concubine or wife. Because remember, the Egyptians are very, very strict, and they say, we don't send out our daughters to be wives. We take other people's daughters to be wives. Anyways, the whole point is that these ruling kings and pharaohs during the Hyksos period, this is when you have Asiatics coming in, integrating, and this has been a pattern since Senmorpsret I, and he's the one who actually put up an obelisk up in Heliopolis in the city of On, and moved the capital up there near Goshen, that whole area that would later become Goshen. And they worshipped Sobek, and that was the 12th dynasty of Egypt. It was the 13th dynasty where things really start to deteriorate. They still worship Sobek, that crocodile god. But then your 14th and 15th dynasties, that really, really breaks apart and divides. You have a lot of Egyptians moving down south, which is considered Upper Egypt because of the flow of the Nile. And they take more of a centralized position, staying near the Nubian territories. Whereas your Asiatics move in, and they come in and take priority in this northern area. This is most likely where we see Joseph being brought in as a slave, sold by Midianites or Ishmaelites. Perhaps they're considered both. But sold into slavery from his brethren to the people up there. But the value of his writing was huge, because typically you have rulers that know how to write. At that time, your common person didn't write, so a slave being able to read and write, completely unheard of. But they know he's the son of Jacob. Well, how did Jacob learn to write? Well, he learned from Isaac. How did Isaac learn? From Abraham. How did Abraham learn? Well, he was the royal son, and then he spent his time in Egypt and retained that schooling and that scribal arts. The scribal arts, it's one way of making yourself eternal was to become a scribe. And your scribal arts kind of divided, and you went more secular, worldly, financier, keeping the books type of scribe. And then you had your scholarly scribe. But that one area of scribal arts that was religious, that had to do with literature, had to do with eternity, had to do with preservation of your name, your seed, all of that. That kept the sanctity of the soul. This was used in tombs and everything. This is what Abraham learned, which means he was very, very proficient. Proficient enough that he himself likely was at an instructor level. Or at least he made himself an instructor for his own sons. Because typically it would be father teaches son. We even have scribal records. People saying, well, my father was a scribe, so I learned this, and you stink at writing. You don't even know how to make a line on your clay tablet, you know. But just aside from that, so this is how Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph all learn this scribal arts. Not only the scribal arts, but that elite religious scribal arts. However, you have Abraham learning in Egypt. What are Egypt's characters for a lot of the hieroglyphics? They're Egyptian gods. Well, Abraham, he's trying to find the one true God, correct? That he believes that his family lineage had gone off the track, that they had taken and created themselves their own gods. So he has no image for his God. It's the unseen God. Something that Joseph is known for in Egypt is he has the hidden God. He has the unseen God. So how do you tell a story of something that happened to you using the Egyptian characters? You can't just make up brand new characters on the spot. And if you made up new characters, then it would have to be taught to other people. Instead, he taught what was already commonly learned, but emphasized, this is what this means, this is what this means. Remember, the Greeks did this, the Romans did this, but all of a sudden, if Abraham does it, oh no, he can't do that, apparently. The other criticism we get about the book of Abraham and the facsimiles is, well, that came from about 100 BC, 200 BC, sometime around there. And it came from an area that Abraham wouldn't have even lived in. But it was written by the hand of Abraham. How do we retain things that are written by somebody's hand? We copy them. What do most people do in scribal schools? They're copying older records. So you're being tested on a clay tablet. In much later years, in Rome, and they use wax. But on a clay tablet, you're being tested on papyrus, is where you do the final work. In fact, the hypocephalus, which is facsimile 2, if I remember correctly, that was a circular round tablet. And the type of scribal tablets people wrote on went from square to rectangular to circular. It really depended on the time era and the type of job and the type of student. So was that a scribal student's what they retained? Was that what was kept on record at the scribal school? Is that they rewrote something, or they had to simplify something greater into something smaller and maintain that with its original record for reference? I mean, we kind of do that with our libraries today. But no, it said written by the hand of Abraham. That's not the hand of Abraham. Yet we look at things like the Shabaka stone. We know that that was the earliest writing in Egyptian history. And it's a creation epic. It's a temple program. It's a presentation. It gives stage directions. It does all of that. When was it found? About 600 BC by a Nubian king, King Shabaka, who engraved it onto a stone. It was on a papyrus before that was being deteriorated, and he engraved it to be more permanent. Well, we align the name to Shabaka because he engraved it and put it on there, but he was pulling from an earlier record. And so the credit of how old it is goes to that earlier record. But there's tons of these examples where we will it'll say written by the hand of this king or this particular scribe, but it dates to a completely different time, and we'll go, oh yes, that's because it was rewritten, it was a record kept. But if it's from the book of Abraham, oh no, that can't happen. No. Where they say, well, that's not what those characters mean. That's not what those hieroglyphics mean. Well, what does Abraham say? Abraham says these characters to represent these things. It's not a direct translation. And not only that, but even the representation that is given, for example, the sons of Horus, which are the canopic jars, in facsimile, was it 1 or 3? In facsimile 3. And then the sons of Horus are the mummified, the mummies. The standing mummies are the sons of Horus, which are upside down, so underworld. And that is also in facsimile 2 on the hypocephalus. In fact, showing them as a mummy without the depictions of an animal head points to an earlier date. And we found lots of different burial hieroglyphics like this. And the huge thing about this writing system was it did have to do with eternity. Everything that we have in the book of Abraham about those facsimiles is giving a record, and it's also referring to eternity. So this is Abraham within the whole context of that history and where he is and what he would literally be able to do, and how would he literally write that. What would it look like if Abraham were to give an understanding of the heavens and the earth through the Egyptian language? Go. Well, it would look like our facsimiles. So that's the scribal schools, even themselves, when you look at what their homework was, they lived very, very strict rules of exactness. They had tardy police. They had their instructors say, no, this is an element of perfection. Because what do? The highest goal is to become, is like a scribe who inscribes on temple walls. So you're going to be charged with the exactness of your hand to scribe the Pharaoh, who is a god king incarnate, according to them, and how efficiently and perfect you do that ensures not only the Pharaoh's eternity, but also your own. So think about that kind of context and learning and education. Abraham is learning line upon line, precept on precept. He's discerning with the Holy Ghost. He has the Spirit. He has had an Enoch experience where he sees all these things. Moses has that same experience. And people tend to say, no, well, the writing of the Bible, that didn't come out. I mean, the earliest could have been time of Moses. I mean, you have times when things are being rewritten, and it's because the written context and language of the world is changing. So you have Abraham, who's coming from a mainly Akkadian language, where that's the lingua franca of the time. But then later, the language everyone speaks is Egyptian or Greek or Roman or not even Hebrew. But so he's trying to learn and preserve what he can, and the world is still going to go its own direction. So look at that also when you consider the book of Ether. where they're running from the Tower of Babel, where they're all of one language, one voice, and surely nothing will stop them. One language, one voice. I mean, we know that there were different languages, dialects of languages, styles of writing, but the style of writing and language all adapted to the culture that it was in, the areas that it spread out to. But when you have an empire being built, being broken down and being built back up, you have these emperors coming in. Their coronation is very similar to what we see in the temple. They see themselves as priests and kings, and also potential gods, that they're gods in mortality. Not only this, it's because all things were revealed to the posterity of Adam and his righteous sons, the 7 high priests. Would you think that might have, and all things that Adam and Diamond were told what happened from the very beginning and what would happen all the way to the end. So would not every king who comes up claim themselves to be that son of God that's expected? And part of their coronation is the death of a king and then him coming back, and why they perpetuate names or say that they ruled for a long period of time, or why they destroy the faces and the rulers of others and the names and everything. They wipe them off the face of the earth because they're trying to rewrite history. Because whoever controls the language, whoever controls the writing, controls everything. When you have the Hyksos coming in, they don't have the same language. They didn't have the same writing. Some did. The foreign rulers that actually did become pharaohs, that were receptive to receiving Joseph, they recognized Joseph's posterity. Like, oh, you must be from Teru, from Urkesh. You have a royal lineage with us too. You should not be a slave. You're way too insightful, way too wise to be kept here. We need to bring up this kingdom. This kingdom is not doing well. And it's because the scribal arts. Why couldn't they interpret Pharaoh's dream? They couldn't interpret Pharaoh's dream because they had no Holy Spirit. They had no gift from the Lord, which is what Joseph ascribes his gift to, is this is from God, not from me. And it's because you have a completely different culture moving in and overtaking a whole area, but they're unfamiliar with the writing and the meanings. And perhaps they know to an extent. I mean, there's lots of Egyptians that are still there, but they're not of a royal lineage. You're our priests. They're the ones that interpret the dreams. They're looking at the dream interpreter book, and it tells you how to interpret dreams. If it's not written down, they can't interpret it. They're like, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, king. Then you have this guy. Why is his interpretation, even though he's not looking in the book, and some of the things he may say are not included in the book and are contradictory to what is written in their dream book? Why would they believe him? Well, if he's coming from Urkesh, that posterity is known for understanding things which are unseen, for understanding the stars, the heavens, understanding the dreams. They were gifted group of people. And this carried out all the way until it became known as Ur of the Chaldees. But why do these Semitic Asiatics, the Hyksos, why do they care? Because they themselves are parallel branches from Mesopotamia, of city-states. They're the posterity of the kings and rulers from these city-states that were overtaken by an empire. Do you think they want to die? No. What happened every time Israel was invaded? You had your family's rulers, they spread out everywhere. The Book of Mormon has a good record of that. So you have branches of the sons. Even I was wondering what happened to that. My kids keep getting into my tools. All right, so we have a pattern of that. We see it in the Book of Mormon. It happened way back then with Abraham. So these sons and rulers are living parallel lives. So you have somebody coming from Mari who are completely destroyed. Urkesh also helped destroy them. But they're trying to get away from the empire who's taking over their kingdoms and they'll be subject to. And the rulers are generally killed. And the sons, they don't want them to rise again. They have to exterminate them. So what do? They flee. They flee to what they know. What are those areas? Egypt. Egypt, where they did their scribal schools. Egypt, where they had sanctuary during times of famine, which did not start with Joseph. We saw it with Abraham. You have Senwosret the third, I think, who started measuring the Nile and showing actual documentation of times of drought and times of flood. And so we know that there were patterns, 7-year patterns, starting all the way back then, that carried on forward. So this is why you see a Hyksos king will adopt Egyptian culture and names, because they're integrating into Egypt. But they also retain whatever they know. Some of their king names, one of their former names, is also a king name up in Mari. So it just makes sense. Again, I'll do this with a computer and PDFs and all that stuff later. I just wanted to get this out because it's on my mind. I was thinking about scribes and scribal schools and the meaning there. So take care.